Hello, my name is Spencer, and in my podcast called The Dictionary, I literally read from the dictionary, but add in my personal comments and stupid jokes to make it more interesting. Episodes are family-friendly, short, and air every single day on basically every podcast platform. Come join me on this journey filled with edutainment.
Hello and welcome to How Did This Not Get Made?
This is the podcast all about the movies you never saw, the scripts that were never filmed, and the ideas that never even made it to the page. My name is David Spencer.
My name is Daniel Kaka.
My name is Sharon.
And my name is Spencer, not the other Spencer.
When I first got hired at my current job, there was somebody else working there who is named Spencer. I don't know why my boss just got such a kick out of going, I don't remember his actual last name, but I'm just going to say Brown, Spencer Brown. So it was like David Spencer Brown. And he just thought it was so funny that it could work that way. I have had friends who thought that my first name was Spencer because somebody called me by my last name so much.
The oldest podcast that you do with Michael, someone had thought that the host of Thank You Internet was David and Spencer.
That's right. We got shouted out on another podcast, and they said, shout out to David and Spencer, which is, of course, the reason for my Twitter name is David and Spencer.
It doesn't help that both you and Michael have first names for both of your names. David Spencer.
That's true.
Michael Hunter.
Dan, you need to change your last name so we can just be all the first names club.
All right. Well, I'm just going to change it to Daniel because that's...
There you go. We're not here to talk about names, though, are we, Dan?
No, we are here to talk about horror.
Yes.
And to talk about zombies. And more specifically, George Andrew Romero.
Real quick, for those who haven't listened to all of our episodes, we previously had the podcast Whores Talk Horror, which is being half represented today on our episode on the unmade Ed Wood film, I Woke Up Early the Day I Died. And we're excited to talk some more horror.
Mm-hmm. So before we dive into this, I just want to just generally ask, what is your history with George Romero, zombie movies?
So the first Romero movie I saw was probably actually Creepshow when I was a kid. And then I would have to say the original Night of the Living Dead, probably in high school. After that, Dawn of the Dead from, what was that, 75?
I think so.
I think, or 78 or something.
Oh, 78, yeah.
But I watched that sometime like later in adulthood. So yeah, I've not seen all of his films, but overall, I like his movies and I like zombie movies. Although the horror zombie genre was getting a little bit saturated for a bit, especially with like The Walking Dead and the spin-off shows from that. But I'm still down for a really unique zombie movie like One Cut of the Dead. I'm not sure if you guys have seen that.
I haven't seen it, but I've heard of it and I want to watch it.
It's amazing. That just puts a completely different spin on the whole zombie movie genre. It's really unique and different. That and Little Monsters, which is an Australian zombie movie starring Lupita Nyong'o.
Yeah, I've seen that one. That one's great.
Yeah.
So I'm liking kind of the newer out-of-the-box zombie movies that are coming out.
Yeah.
I have a similar history. I mean, I don't think I saw Night of the Living Dead until much, much later into adulthood. I remember seeing the Mall one. It was the remake of the Mall one. I remember seeing that in the theater. I think I saw Land of the Dead. I think that was the next one where like the zombies are starting to be like conscious.
Oh, weird.
I think John Leguizamo was in that one. I think I rented that on probably DVD. That's my history with Romero. But then, of course, you know, Shaun of the Dead being represented on a t-shirt over there. Daniel's wearing, it's not just a Shaun of the Dead t-shirt. It's the whole trilogy t-shirt, which is awesome.
Cornetto. So I have this thing for every episode that we do. I have a shirt ready in theme with that.
Have you ever had to buy a shirt specifically in preparation for the episode that you're going to do?
No, I have many obsessions over the stuff that I'm researching because I am stuck in this world for like maybe a week or two while I'm doing this research. And I'm just so enveloped with it to the point where like I become obsessed and start watching movies related to it. And then that is reflected in my wardrobe. So if I'm at Target and we're talking about Jurassic Park 4, and I'm just like, well, I've never owned a Jurassic Park shirt before. Now I need one.
Yeah. I like it because I have a lot of shirts like that too. Similar to Sharon, I love the new takes on zombie movies because it was getting saturated. So like, of course, Zombieland was fun. There was that one, it was like a romantic comedy zombie movie where the guy is living
Warm
in
Bodies.
Warm Bodies. That was different and silly and cute and fun.
As far as George Romero goes, I think the only movie of his that I've seen was Dawn of the Dead, which is the one in the mall. I don't think I've seen any of his other movies. A lot of like 70s, 80s horror, really horror in general, isn't necessarily my thing as much. And I haven't seen too much of like modern zombie movies as well, other than Shaun of the Dead. I can't think about zombie storytelling without thinking of back when Cracked did video content before they fired all their writers. They had this great series called After Hours, and they had a video about the idea that zombie movies are about current Republicans and vampire movies are about current Democrats. And basically going through the different like zombie movies and vampire movies in different eras and how it basically reflected the way media talked about whoever was in office. And it was really, really fascinating, and how like Dawn of the Dead was all in a mall and all about like capitalist Reagan era. And then we get sexy Edward Vampire at the same time we get sexy Obama. It's just this whole breakdown that whenever I think of either of those tropes now, my brain is constantly trying to think, okay, what's the political allegory here? I think the person who wrote that video now is a writer for Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, which I guess makes sense.
Yeah.
The other thing I'll say about George Romero, though, I don't know if this is going to come up, Dan, but one of my favorite little tidbits, which I guess means I might have seen something else of George Romero, is that he got his start filming stuff for Mr. Rogers.
Yep.
That was like one of his first breaks was directing bits for early Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. I think even like when it was local before it got nationally syndicated. Fred Rogers and George Romero had a lifelong friendship.
They were good buds with each other. So as far as my history with George Romero, I started to at least recognize his work when I was in college. I went to school for film and I was just consuming everything. And at the point, Edgar Wright was highly influential. But the thing is, when you go into Edgar Wright, much like if you go into Quentin Tarantino, they are oftentimes referencing many different filmmakers in their film. So like they are kind of like this gateway into the history of film. Even in our film class, there was a film breakdown class that I had taken, and one of them was spoof films or like parody films. And the film that we actually watched in the class was Shaun of the Dead. And that started opening up, and that's when I went through and I found Night of the Living Dead. I watched Dawn of the Dead as well. I was aware of like George Romero was kind of the beginning of all of that. And I've heard breakdowns from Edgar Wright talking about the idea that's kind of like this Bible, almost like these set of rules that need to be followed in order for a zombie film to be made. And it's really interesting to see how those rules, they are still kind of stagnant, even though you can still really play with this genre. And I really enjoyed The Walking Dead when that came out, because that was the first time that we ever really saw a TV show that was going to incorporate zombies. Funny enough, with Zombieland, I had found out that it was originally supposed to be a television show. If you watch that movie, if you remember when the girls steal their car and drive off with it, that was supposed to be the end of the pilot episode. But then they decided to keep on going with that. And the reason why they didn't make it into a TV show is because the executives at the time had said, oh no, I don't think the world is ready for a zombie television show yet. And sure enough, like 2 years later, we had The Walking Dead. And then I heard about the graphic novel and I just consumed like as much as I could with the graphic novel. And it was so interesting to see the contrast between that, but like actually seeing a serialized story being well told that has to do with like the end of the world and zombies and like this morality question that's given to you when the world is like in this disarray. I found that really interesting.
It is kind of wild how all of the rules of this genre, like it didn't all come from this one guy, but it was really the way these different rules and mythos were put together from very different ideas and cultures. It's kind of wild that something with such specific rules was all put into one thing and is now like, you can't make a zombie movie anymore or anything zombie without like following those genre rules.
Yeah. I want to talk just briefly about George Romero and kind of where he started, how that all happened. George A. Romero, he was born February 4th, 1940 in the Bronx. Growing up, he was a fan of horror comics and would describe himself as a, quote, film freak. One of his favorite movies growing up was a Maura Scherer musical based on a Jacques Offenbach opera titled The Tales of Hoffmann. But to watch it repeatedly, he would actually have to rent out reels from a place in Manhattan in which he would have to take the subway in order to get there. One time he requested the film and they informed him that it was actually rented out by another kid. His name was like Marty Scorsese or something like that. Romero attended school at Carnegie Institute of Technology, which is now known as Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, and that's where he studied film and genre. Now, his first gig in the industry was when he actually worked for Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, shooting documentary segments for the show.
I did Mr. Rogers Gets a Tonsillectomy. To this day, the scariest film I ever made.
In 1960, George and his friends, John Russo and Russell Strainer, they co-founded the production company Latent Image, which primarily made TV shows and industrial films. Working on commercials, though, was not creatively thrilling for the team, and they wanted to instead make a horror film. They got in contact with Carl Hardman and Marilyn Eastman, the president and VP of Harmon Associates Incorporated, a Pittsburgh-based industrial film firm. And that's where they pitched the idea for this horror film. They were conceived, and together they formed a new production company, which they called Image 10, because there were initially 10 initial members. Each member put in about $600 towards the film, and then after finding about 10 more members to join, they contributed $600 each as well, and they budgeted about $12,000 to make this film, which wasn't enough to actually do it. And then eventually they were able to raise about $114,000 to finally make their movie.
That's a big difference.
It's a very big difference, and I don't know where that money came from, and I'm not going to question that. So the first draft, it was actually titled Monster Flick. It was written by John Russo and George Romero. This horror comedy was about adolescent aliens who come to Earth and befriend teenagers.
Horror comedy. That's amazing. That was George Romero's first idea.
The episode that we did before this was Night Skies, and it sounds exactly like that. Bunch of aliens coming down, terrorizing people. Perfect.
Yeah.
In the second draft, a young man runs away from home and discovers human corpses that aliens were using as food. Russo started fleshing out his ideas. Instead of just dead bodies, they would be recently deceased reanimated corpses, which Romero referred to as ghouls, who were flesh eaters.
This is also starting to sound very similar to Plan 9.
Yes, it is.
Going back to Ed Wood.
So when Russo completed the final draft, it came out to be a 3-part story. The first being Night of the Living Dead, and then the sequels completed the trilogy, which was Dawn of the Dead and then Day of the Dead. So this was all planned out from the start, even though the movies were quite far from each other. So Dawn of the Dead came out in 1978, and then Day of the Dead nearly a decade later in 1985. For Romero, he drew a lot of inspiration from Richard Matheson's 1954 horror novel about a plague that rips through Los Angeles, creating vampire-like creatures that prey on the uninfected, called I Am Legend. Romero said, quote, "I thought I Am Legend was about revolution. I said, if you're going to do something about revolution, you should start at the beginning. I mean, Richard started his book with one man left. Everybody in the world has become a vampire. I said, we got to start at the beginning and tweak it up a little bit. I couldn't use vampires because he did. So I wanted something that would be an earth-shaking change. Something that was forever. Something that was really at the heart of it. I said, so what if the dead stop being dead? And the stories are about how people respond or fail to respond to this. This is really all these ghouls ever represented to me. In Richard's book, in the original I Am Legend, that's what I thought the book was about. There's a global change, and there's one guy holding out saying, wait a minute, I'm still human. He's wrong. Go ahead, join them. You'll live forever. In a certain sense, he's wrong, but on the other hand, you've got to respect him for taking that position. There has been other interpretations of I Am Legend. So we had the 1971 The Last Man on Earth. In 1971 as well, we had Omega Man. And then there was the 2007 I Am Legend with, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
Well, you know, that guy that we can't remember.
Yeah.
I don't think he ever did anything with his life.
Oh, no, he didn't do much after that. Matheson did see Night of the Living Dead, and he reacted to it by saying it was kind of cornball. And later said that George Romero is a nice guy, though. I didn't harbor any animosity towards him. Night of the Living Dead, it premiered October 1st, 1968 at the Fulton Theater in Pittsburgh. When it was distributed nationally, it was billed as a Saturday afternoon matinee, which is usually when horror films were typically shown. The film was met with praise and controversy. The MPAA rating systems wouldn't be put into place until a month after this film was released. I don't know if this is the cause of having the MPAA having to rate films, but it seems like this is the reason why, is because of Night of the Living Dead. Because there was no rating system in place, that meant that teenagers and kids could just freely watch the movie with no barriers to see it.
Nice.
Roger Ebert talks about when he reviewed the film, he's quoted saying, I don't think the younger kids really knew what hit them. They were used to going to movies, sure. And then they would see some horror movies before, sure. But this was something else. The kids in the audience were stunned. There was almost complete silence. The movie had stopped being delightfully scary halfway through and then became unexpectedly terrifying. There was a little girl across the aisle from me, maybe 9 years old, who was sitting still in her seat and crying. It's hard to remember what sort of effect this movie might have on you when you were 6 or 7, but try to remember, at that age, kids take the event on the screen seriously, and they identify fiercely with the hero. Now, when the hero is killed, that's not a happy ending, but a tragic one. Nobody got out alive. It's just over. That's all. So Variety, they actually came out with a scathing review stating, until the Supreme Court establishes clear-cut guidelines to the pornography of violence, Night of the Living Dead will serve nicely as an outer limit definition by example. In a mere 90 minutes, this horror film casts serious aspirations on the social responsibilities of the Pittsburgh-based makers, distributor Walter Reed, the film industry as a whole, and the exhibitors who book the picture, as well as raising doubts about the future of the regional cinema movement and about the moral health of filmgoers who cheerfully opt for this unrelieved orgy of sadism.
There's a lot of negative feelings from a lot of film goers towards like the MPAA and the rating system and stuff, which definitely has a lot of problems, especially that it's like a couple of people with vague ideas on what's right or wrong. But yeah, I think it's at least better than before the MPAA, where it was just everybody saying that every film has to be a certain way or it is morally wrong, as opposed to at least having some system to say, hey, this is less suitable for these audiences.
Yeah, this definitely like shook things up to be like, oh, maybe we should like rein this in instead of like having Hollywood, because we used to have the, what was the code?
Hays Code.
It looked like we were kind of exiting that era, and especially with film equipment becoming cheaper, you have a lot more independent filmmakers who are basically going out and just kind of doing whatever they wanted to and making the stories that weren't being controlled by a studio. So this was an interesting case of that.
They were talking about Night of the Living Dead, the black and white movie, which has, I feel like I remember, very little blood. I mean, there's a relatively good amount of violence, but like, especially from today's standards, it's pretty tame.
Oh, yeah.
But from 1968 standards, it was,
Exactly.
you know.
Honestly, any publicity, it's still good publicity. Even when you're being accused of causing the moral downfall of the country.
Yeah, when you say how crazy and immoral this movie is, of course people are going to want to go see it.
Oh, yeah.
And how much of that controversy was due to the fact that the male lead was a black man
Yeah.
with a white woman? And I know there was questions about like, what are they doing together? And is there another story going on between them? And I know that added to a lot of the controversy and added to the confusion over, you know, should children be seeing this? As you said, much different times back
Yeah,
then.
it's very...
Although surprisingly, still kind of similar, unfortunately.
Yeah. The movie was immensely popular. In domestic sales, it made about $15 million in the box office. This is considering that this is a movie that was just over $100,000 to make. And then it got translated into 25 different languages. And because of that, their profits actually doubled in the box office from there. Like you were mentioning before, there was this unintended criticism. This film was a study of humanity. The lines of good and evil, right and wrong were blurred, and the tone of the film strikes a nerve that goes deeper than people just having to defeat a monster. You have to ask yourself questions like, what do you do when a loved one becomes a monster? Another big factor was the main character, Ben. He was black, especially in the same year that Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated. This hits audiences even harder when Ben, the lone survivor, is shot and killed by a group of white men in the end of the film because he was suspected of being one of the ghouls. Another interesting factor of the film was that it was shot like a newsreel. It was like a run and gun type style, which reflected a lot of how the protests were covered around that time. So the biggest contribution that has the most influence in cultural media was the idea and the concept of the zombie. Now, at first, Romero avoided the word altogether. In fact, the movie never even mentions the word at all. Part of the reason is because he wanted to avoid the connection with the 1932 movie White Zombie, which is a whitewashed interpretation of the Haitian folklore. In fact, Romero wasn't even aware of the Haitian term or the folklore at all. To be fair, like, for the most part, most of the US was not aware of this term at all, unless you were aware of like voodoo or vodou religions, which were predominantly around like the New Orleans area. According to Haitian folklore, a zombie, which in Haitian French is zombie, and then in Haitian Creole is zombie, is a animated corpse raised by magical means such as witchcraft or black magic. The idea came from slaves in Haiti and how forced labor seemed to remove the life out of them, working tirelessly, seeing death as their relief from this awful existence. The lore and the religion goes a lot deeper, but unfortunately we don't actually have the time to go into that subject, but it is fascinating to learn about like how zombies in Haitian folklore actually came about.
I didn't even think that it could be related to the experience of slavery at the time, but that totally makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The term was used by critics and journalists to describe the creatures in the film. And then Romero eventually just accepted that term and used it himself. And then he even embraced it when he used it in the sequel, Dawn of the Dead. This would give him the unintended title, the father of the zombie film, giving a structure to what it would be to be an undead creature, consuming flesh. Anyone can be a zombie if infected by a bite or a wound. They're oftentimes slow moving, although with recent iterations, we've had zombies that can now run.
Rule number 1 for surviving Zombieland: cardio.
28 days later?
28 days later, yeah. They are sprinting. They are quick. They are fast. And that is terrifying.
They were running out of ways to make them scary.
Yeah.
Was the Zack Snyder Day of the Dead?
Dawn of the Dead.
Did that have fast zombies, Dawn of the Dead?
Wait, no. At the end, they were running because they were getting onto the boat.
Oh, okay.
And they seemed to be like running and thrashing after them.
That was the remake of the one in the mall, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
They were fast because it started off with that little girl in the house and she just like runs down the hallway, doesn't she?
Yeah.
That was some creepy stuff right there.
I wonder how much of fast zombies and movies was influenced by fast zombies starting to show up in video games, where you started to have video games using zombie combat as a genre, and you had horror games like Resident Evil and everything, but a slow zombie is not going to be a threat in a first-person shooter video game, so they have to amp up their abilities. So I almost wonder how much of that bled into fast zombies showing up in movies.
Like, I remember playing Resident Evil, and like shooting the regular zombies were no problem, even if there was like a big horde of them. But once those dogs came after you, it was the worst. Those things were awful to try and defeat. So, more rules about being a zombie. They can only be destroyed by destroying the brain or the head.
The attackers can be stopped by removing the head or destroying the brain. I'll repeat that, by removing the head or destroying the brain.
But something that is not really thought of before, but they have a connection to the life that they once lived. So it's been known that some zombies are capable of like using tools or using weapons. Like in Day of the Dead, there's a zombie that uses a gun, and they will oftentimes reconvene to places that are familiar to them, which is why we have zombies going to the mall in Dawn of the Dead. And what I find most intriguing and kind of heartbreaking is the moan that the zombies give, as if they were mourning the life that they once lived. That's kind of how Romero unintentionally set the standard as to like how zombies are supposed to move, and basically just creating this like staple monster in a way.
So he didn't have any of that in mind when he first made Night of the Living Dead.
No, he just wanted to do like, how can I do vampires but cheaper?
And then it wasn't until he embraced the word zombie related to the ghouls that were in the film, and then he made more, and it turned into this whole zombie thing. So between like the white zombie movie from the 30s, which we did actually see a few years back, between that and Night of the Living Dead, there was nothing in like the zombie world. Like he totally created it in the 70s, basically.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess you have the Mummy as like just this undead creature, but like the idea of like a flesh-eating undead person was just not in anyone's mind.
It's totally different, but Scooby Doo even, there was an episode with a zombie that was like late 60s or early 70s.
Toads and snails and puppy dog tails. That's what zombies are made of.
I'm sure that was probably either right around the same time as Night of the Living Dead, or maybe it was like just after. Scooby Doo started in like 68 or something like that. Yeah. So yeah, I don't remember exactly which year that episode came out, but I remember seeing a zombie in Scooby Doo as well.
I just looked it up. It started in 1969, which would have been a year after.
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely checks out that could be inspiration. And I think I know the monster you're talking about, the big green face.
Yeah.
Wrong. Yeah, dumb zombie.
The franchise of Night of the Living Dead continued with Dawn and Day of the Dead, as mentioned before. There was the remake of Night of the Living Dead, which was done in the 90s, which Romero wrote saying that it was an apology to the character Barbara as a response to the feminist movement.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
There was a Dawn of the Dead remake, which was done by Zack Snyder in 2004, which we've mentioned before. And then what I'm representing right now, Edgar Wright came out with the horror comedy film Shaun of the Dead.
I don't want to cause a fuss.
We're coming to get you, Barbara.
I don't know if you've seen the cover recently for Shaun of the Dead, but you'll notice that with a lot of movie covers, they'll put in like quotes from critics and whatnot, but there's only one single quote on Shaun of the Dead, and it is a George Romero quote.
Oh, I see it.
What does it say?
An absolute blast.
Exactly.
He's not wrong.
Yeah, that was his response to seeing Shaun of the Dead, and he was like, yes, that's going on the cover. I don't want anyone else to have any quotes on this. I want his quote, because this movie was essentially for him. This is a love letter to your filmmaking.
Aw.
Romero continued the franchise with The Land of the Dead in 2005, Diary of the Dead in 2007, and Survival of the Dead in 2009. Needless to say, he has been majorly influential in film, socio-political commentary, horror, and the zombie genre. And the films, TV shows, and the many forms of media that he's inspired are endless. Obviously, George Romero did not stay in the Of the Dead franchise his whole career. He has made other memorable films like The Crazies, Martin, Knight Rider's Creep Show, Monkey Shines, The Half Dark, and The Bruiser. He's also turned down a few films like the early draft of Resident Evil. And even though Romero and Stephen King collaborated on many projects, he unfortunately did not take the chance to adapt Pet Sematary, Salem's Lot, It, and The Stand. The project that I find most interesting, though, that didn't get made, and this is the one that we are going to be covered, is The Diamond Dead, a post-apocalyptic zombie tale, which seems right up the alley of Romero, who could handle this because it has one fantastical twist in that it was a musical, much like his favorite movie growing up. So I almost did this episode in season 2, and I just couldn't really find much information on it. And it wasn't until I really did a deep dive that something just opened up. And I believe I sent you the website details for it. We actually had to use the Wayback Machine to go into the website to realize that this had momentum and it was going to go places. And it seemed like it went pretty far before it actually all shut down. The project was put together in the early 2000s, and the idea came from artist Brian Cooper, who had connections with the producer Andrew Gaddy, who made The Return of Captain Invincible.
40 years ago, he said he'd never fly again, and for good reason.
I couldn't even tell the good guys from the bad guys.
But when his country calls...
We need you badly, Captain Invincible. We need you now. Real badly.
When the evil Mr. Midnight threatens America.
Today, New York. Tomorrow, the world.
It has Vincent Price in it, Alan Arkin's in it. I want to see this movie, and I guess it's been remade to be Hancock now.
And Christopher Lee is in it.
Yes, Christopher Lee is in it. So yeah, because he knew Andrew Gaddy, that got him in contact with George Romero and the composer Richard Hartley, who is most famously known for composing the music for the Rocky Horror Picture Show, amongst other projects, which includes the 1968 Doctor Who series Mind Warp. I don't know if this is true or not. Ridley Scott kept popping up as the producer for this film.
It is true. So Mindy started doing some research on this, but she sent us an interview. It was at some horror movie convention from 2013 where Romero was at a Q&A panel and someone asked about this film.
It's a script called Diamond Dead. And this guy, a producer, had this script, sent it to me. I sort of liked some of it, and I did a rewrite on spec. And Ridley Scott's company, Scott Free, really liked it, and they took meetings with us. They went around with us to everywhere, and trying to sell it. And they were not successful. We weren't successful. We could never sell it. The producer was an Australian guy who eventually went home. And I mean, everybody, for some reason, I think the audiences would love this movie. It's about a dead rock band. They get killed accidentally, and they keep on ticking. And it was a really fun script. Now, it's recently been rewritten, and I just a couple of weeks ago got the rewrite on it, and it's just not even a pale shadow of what it used to be. But everybody for the last 10 years, I don't know why, is it the title? I don't know what it is, but people remember Diamond Dead. And
someone else that was involved was George Romero's son, G. Cameron Romero, was involved in helping develop the film. Cooper, from what I found on the DiamondDead.com, he wrote 3 drafts of The Diamond Dead, while getting notes and feedback primarily from George. So this was something that I had discovered through the website, is that he was the writer for it. The reason why I didn't do it in season 2 is because I found all these really, really short articles of he was going to do a musical and then he didn't. George Romero and Richard Hartley were compiling ideas together and a script came out of that. That's not true. So once I discovered that Brian Cooper was the writer of this movie, it opened up so many other things. So in finding out that he was the screenwriter, it actually sent me down a rabbit hole. When looking for a leaked script, I usually search for the name of the script, anyone attached to the production, and a PDF to see what pops up. So I found the 3 versions written by Brian Cooper, who I'd never heard before. So I dug deeper to find out more if this script was actually legitimate. So first I looked for his name on IMDb, see if there's any credits, and I went through dozens of profiles that said Brian Cooper, but none of them actually seemed to match the Brian Cooper that I was looking for. Did you read his bio?
Mm-mm.
Because it is wild.
This is the first time that we've had this much of a story on how the research panned out on this. But I know Dan has been telling me about this for a little bit.
So in the bio, it claims that he, quote, worked with Vincent Price, Elvira, Linnea Quigley, and many others. And then his illustrations have appeared in works by Clive Barker, Stephen King, Joe Lansdale, Robert Bloch, and many others. There were even quotes that were praising him, saying that Brian Cooper is like John Waters on crack. And then,
Whoa.
I thought John Waters was John Waters on crack.
Another one was like, if Vargas had ever done acid, he would have been Brian Cooper. That was the guy who wrote Time Wars and Friday the 13th. I actually looked up these quotes. None of it. There was no matches for any of these quotes. And I was like, this guy doesn't exist.
Is this somebody just making up his own credits and like,
yeah,
saying, look at all these?
Or is it like a pseudonym or something? Is it a pen name?
I don't know. Like, I kept looking.
He had a friend who could do great impressions of like Stephen King and everybody and just record these clips.
I was pretty convinced that this person does not exist. So I kept searching. And I had found out that the script had actually been adapted into a play done at the Landless Theater Company from about 2004 to 2009. And I actually managed to track down one of the founding members of Landless. His name is Andrew Lloyd Bachman. And I got an interview with him to learn more about the Diamond Dead.
Crash test, dummies in love. You think when we learn that love kills, we learn that love kills.
Just to start off, I'm just going to have you state who you are, so your name, and then just kind of what you do. So basically, if you like handed me a business card, like what would it say underneath your name?
Sure. My name's Andrew Bachman. My professional name is Andrew Lloyd Bachman, and I'm the producing artistic director of Landless Theater Company, and also an actor, director, playwright, educator, writer, composer, all the stuff we do to make a living somehow, juggling it all.
All over the place. Wow. I reached out to you because I kept going through this research and I discovered that there was actually a play that was put together for the Diamond Dead. And this is kind of why I reached out to you, because you, I think, would have more insight onto this. So I found out that it was done through the Landless Theater. With the Landless Theater, like, how did that get started? What was your involvement with it, and where did it go from there? Like, when did it start?
Sure. Well, we were formally incorporated back in 2003. We're a nonprofit, and our mission is to cultivate new and diverse audiences for live theater. DC is a very conservative town in many ways, but, you know, particularly in theater, there was not a lot of campy theater or edgy theater or avant-garde theater. I mean, there's a bit of that with our woolly mammoth theater here in town, but back in 2003, in that era, I was recently out of college. I'd gone away to Conservatory, University of the Arts, to study musical theater. Mm-hmm. I was working locally as a musical theater actor, and I had this group of high school friends that we formed kind of a theater company, kind of to do children's theater when we were in high school. So in part, I reconnected with those guys, but also I was working in the local dinner theater circuit. I was like the youngest Captain Von Trapp in Sound of Music history, probably. I was 20 years old and playing Captain Von Trapp in a professional production, and this was a dinner theater, so I was waiting tables, and literally, like, the bartender would card me to prove that I was under 21 because I looked older, but, you know. But anyhow, so after you've done the Sound of Music for so many performances over so many months, you know, we were just really, like, hungry to do something exciting. And we were looking at the audiences, and audiences were getting older and older and older, and people were not going to theater. And it was just a time where we were like, we just need to do something cool. We just need something cool to happen, you know. So, so we founded Landless, and we really jumped into doing, you know, really audience interactive kind of work. And we were really into pop culture and camp, you know, a little bit of edge to, you know, Grand Guignol kind of work to an extent. Just anything that would really bring people out to theater who wouldn't normally go to theater. You know, we're older now, but we still kind of do that sort of things. We're still around. Probably our biggest claim to fame over the years has been a heavy metal version of Sweeney Todd.
You, sir, too, sir, welcome to the grave. I will have been vengeance. I will have salvation.
Sondheim actually gave us permission to do, and he even worked with us to a certain extent to adapt the material. You know, we have this whole kind of metal theater genre that we're developing. And I would say Diamond Dead was probably the root of that. I mean, that was the first time we really jumped into kind of like rock theater. So
what type of permissions do you need to actually put on a theater? Like if something is already established, if there's already IP that's out there?
Well, it depends. Most theater pieces, you just go to a theatrical licensor and you just kind of a straight license. When you're doing something like turning the score of Sweeney Todd or The Mystery of Edwin Drood into a heavy metal piece, you know, obviously the creator has to get involved and has to give special permission. Mm-hmm. Diamond Dead was interesting because it was kind of nothing at that point. I mean, it was what you saw, that website. You know, there was this tremendous hype around this movie that was going to be made that it had not been made yet. So it was kind of like lingering out there. And there were those screenplays that Brian wrote that were kind of hanging out there. So I don't even know that you could say we adapted a movie because the movie hadn't been a thing yet, you know?
Yeah. So then how did you first hear about it then?
One of my company members was really involved in film and kind of the horror film community. And she knew that we loved Rocky Horror. That was like one of our early pieces that we did. She told me about Richard Hartley, who, you know, has this history with the Rocky Horror Show. Mm-hmm. She was like, you know, he's working on a movie musical with George A. Romero and there's all this hype surrounding it. And she took me to this website to look and said, oh, this looks cool. And I just kind of sent an email to the website. Almost instantly got a call back from the producer, Andrew Gaddy, and I haven't talked to him in years, but he was a great mentor to me when we worked on this project, and I always, you know, think back really fondly on him. But, you know, he was just really game for it. He was just like, hey, we've tried everything else to try to get this movie produced. Let's see what would happen if you do a play. You know, maybe that'll get some kind of groundswell to get some investors behind it.
So who is Andrew Gaddy? You said he was one of the producers.
He was the producer at that point. You know, he had some history doing, oh man, I feel bad not knowing the name of this musical because we talked about it a lot, but it was a movie with Alan Arkin and Christopher Lee, a movie musical about this drunk superhero.
I'm looking at his IMDb right now. I see The Return of Captain Invincible.
Yes, that was the one. And there were also discussions about making that into a stage play at some point.
So yeah, you found the script online. I found the same script as well. Did he actually confirm that this is like the official script that they were working off of?
I don't know all of the background of what was going on with the film script. Have you found Brian?
I've been searching everywhere. Here's my thing about it is that he kind of just disappeared off the face of the earth. Either that or like he just doesn't exist.
No, he exists.
And I'm trying to get down to the bottom of this, and
he's out there. He was not the guy who was kind of the point person for Diamond Dead. He was the original creator of Diamond Dead. He's somewhere out there in the Midwest. I haven't talked to him in years either, and we barely worked together even when we were putting the stage play together. He came to the first production, and you know we had a little interaction with him.
Oh.
Brian he's an enigma. He's a genius. He just comes up with these amazing ideas. He just kind of created these characters and the concept for Diamond Dead. And my understanding, I don't know the legalities or the ins and outs, but my understanding is I think Andrew Gaddy purchased the option to the Diamond Dead concept and to Brian's scripts. And I think he then went after Romero and Richard Hartley, the composer, who are both friends of Andrew's. And he just kind of had this vision for, hey, what if we bring the Rocky Horror world and the zombie George A. Romero Night of the Living Dead world together on this kind of Tim Burton-y kind of project. And it was a great idea. Brian created the Diamond Dead. His background, from my understanding, was he was a makeup artist and he worked on theme park attractions and he was a graphic artist. I think he had a sort of like a comic or graphic novel of some sort.
The comic strip Nymph.
Yeah. And Diamond Dead was kind of just a Tim Burton-y kind of concept that he had for this zombie rock band. He had sketches of the characters and he really thought them out. The character that I was playing, Dr. Diabolicus, was like, I remember him sitting down and telling me his inspiration for that character was seeing David Lee Roth in a bar, you know, just trying to impress women pathetically, like doing card tricks. You know, this image of this washed up rock star who's just getting too old, past his prime and all this stuff. So all these characters were just really brilliantly drawn, and that all came from Brian.
So you actually did meet him?
Yeah, I met everybody except for, I never met George, unfortunately, which is really sad for me because I'm from Pittsburgh and, you know, Night of the Living Dead is huge there.
Oh, yeah.
George was never really involved in the stage play. And my understanding was that the scripts that I worked from when making the adaptation were Brian's original scripts before George was brought into the pictures.
Huh. What was Brian like? Physical description of him? Like, you mentioned a lot about his personalities. I imagine that someone who's that creative isn't going to come in with like a suit and tie.
Oh, no. No, he's a character. I mean, he was, I don't know how I would describe him other than to say he was very much ahead of his time in terms of gender fluidity. Like back in 2003, you just didn't see people who were so comfortable being kind of gender fluid. And that's, I guess, how I would describe him. And just a really cool performance artist. I mean, like in the short time I knew him, I would say he taught me what it was to be a performance artist. And I've never gone as far into that as he did in his life. You know, through that whole experience, I started to learn what it was like to build a character where you weren't just a character on stage as a musical actor, but you would actually go out into the city in costume, just being this character and interacting with people in bars. And when we were doing the show, you know, we used to go out to promote the show as a band and we would just hang out in the bars in DC. And I remember sitting there, and I'm a fairly conservative person, but you wouldn't have known it with the pleather and all the stuff I was wearing and the chains and the face makeup and all this stuff. And I remember sitting there, I think it was like the first Gulf War. I just spent the whole night just sitting there at the bar talking to a soldier who was, I guess, on leave before he had to go back overseas. And we just had this heart-to-heart conversation. And he kept referring to me as like, you know, I understand guys like you. You know? And I'm laughing on the inside because I'm like, I am such a normal, you know. I was raised in the suburbs. You know, I'm really just not this crazy guy that you think I am that you're looking at. So, but it was funny to kind of get that window into people when you went out in the world like that.
Wow. Well, I guess that kind of solves the mystery that Brian Cooper is an actual real person.
He is real and he's out there. The best way to find Brian Cooper is to start talking about Diamond Dead. If you put up a podcast about Diamond Dead, hopefully he'll probably find you. So
yeah, I'm hoping Brian will come out of the woodwork because I've been searching relentlessly for this guy. I thought he would have some sort of IMDb credits and he's not there. I mixed him up with another guy who's also Brian Cooper, but it's spelled with a Y, B-R-Y-A-N. There were quotes about him from like the guy who wrote Psycho, Tracy Lords. This is actually my favorite quote that Tracy Lords says is like, Brian Cooper is like John Waters on crack.
That's pretty accurate.
I looked up that quote and I was like, it's nowhere to be found. So I was like, I don't know. Like, it just seemed like either someone just made up an anonymous name or like the stage name. And I just like, it's just become this like ongoing mystery for me. Like, who is Brian Cooper? Where are you? Like,
I think you'll find him.
Yeah. What is the story of Diamond Dead? Just the play or just the script? Like, what is the plot?
Well, there were so many versions of the script. The stage play, I really wanted to just focus on an event of a single Diamond Dead concert. Okay. There was such a world that was created between Brian's drafts of the script and George's later drafts of the script. But the general premise of it is there's a young woman who wants to be part of her boyfriend's band. They're very misogynistic and they don't want to let her be a part. So she blows them up. She later feels remorse for it. So she makes a pact with death to bring them back to life. And so they come back as zombies and they're kind of her slaves at that point. And part of the pact is that once a year they had to bring so many souls to Satan or whoever, you know, in order to meet this quota. So she would take this zombie band around. They really sucked in life. Like they were a terrible band, but suddenly when they were zombies, suddenly they had this mass appeal and people were just fascinated with them and they would draw millions and millions of people in. And I don't know if you're a fan of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but it always kind of reminded me of the Buffy episode where the fake vampire goth kids would hold this party where the real vampires would come in and eat everybody. So that was kind of the premise. They were luring the audience to their deaths. And that was really the jumping off point for our concert was like, hey, Diamond Dead's coming to town. You've never heard of them. They're underground. They're mysterious. And you, the audience, will become zombies when you come to the show.
That's a really neat premise. I like that.
It's a horrible sight. 'Cause the
call me.
What was the general reception of the play? I saw that there was the 2008 Best Musical Pick of the Capital Fringe Festival.
I think 2004 was our first production, and I can only describe it as disastrous. It was just, we were young and we had no money, and we did this performance in DC, which, as I said, is very conservative and not the place where you want to start a zombie musical, because
I did read some reviews for it. I think the best review that I saw was the DC theater scene. He seemed to really enjoy it. And then I kept going into like other reviews, and everyone's just like, I don't know what this is. I don't know what I'm watching.
Right. And there was a very liberal bent to it as well. The Washington Times is a very conservative, right-wing kind of paper. And I remember them writing just like a hit piece about it, There was also a huge controversy because in the play, in the script at some point, Jesus appears smoking weed. And it was like, and there was some guy in Scotland who was a Christian fundamentalist, a born again, who was so offended by this. And there was the Washington City paper. I don't know if you found that article, but there was an article about this ongoing feud between that guy and me about, the controversy surrounding that. And it was getting a little ridiculous. But so the first production in 2004, it was rough. It was in a small theater, and we had those guys, the producer and Richard Hartley, the composer, and Brian Cooper. They all came into town to see it. And when we first opened, it was a little half baked. We were under so much stress, and we made the mistake of performing in a 40-seat theater and having a press night that was all press.
Oh no!
So,
everyone's a critic.
Yeah, there were no people there to have fun. There were no young people. I mean, you could describe it as a graveyard. Here's a show that is supposed to be kind of a Rocky Horror kind of interactive kind of show, and nobody in the audience wanted to play along, and they were there to judge. So that was kind of the whole first run of the show. But we had faith and we loved it. Yeah. And years later, the DC Capital Fringe Festival opened, and we thought, well, this is probably the audience that we always needed Diamond Dead to be seen by. So we remounted the show. Most of the people who were involved in the first production came back. I had been married at that point, and my wife is kind of our resident director for our company, and she really loved the piece. She was like, why didn't you guys do more with this? And I was like, do you know how bad it was? Do you know what we went through with this thing? She had this vision for it. She kind of coaxed us to bring it back, and suddenly we were in a slightly larger theater, and we had a captive audience that was coming, and people liked it, which was kind of what I always thought from the beginning was really all this play needs is an audience that wants to see it. I think once the audience is there that is open to this experience, I think it's going to be fun and people are going to enjoy it.
Yeah. This is my assumption. Your wife is Melissa?
Yes.
I saw in a few of the reviews directed by Melissa.
Yeah, she did not direct the initial production. In fact, I didn't know her at that point in 2004, but by 2008, we were together and she was working with the company and she had taken it over.
Did you meet through the company, or was it outside of the company and then you brought her in?
We met in theater. We knew each other for a year or so before we got married, and we started working together in Landless, and that sort of thing. So.
All right. This was a long time ago, 2008. That's 13 years ago. Do you see any future for the Diamond Dead? Is it going to come back from the dead?
Every time someone like you contacts me, I start thinking about it, and then we put together a reunion show of some sort. So when I was first in the show, the cast, we were, in our 20s, and most shows you grow out of. But I think every time we do Diamond Dead, we find that these zombies almost work better the older you get. It's like...
It's the less prosthetics you have to put on.
Right. You're naturally decaying, and it's just, and the whole kind of undercurrent concept of the whole thing was about this kind of satire on aging rock stars. Now that you're bringing it up again, I'm probably going to post about this podcast and people will start talking about it and they'll say, hey, why don't you bring back Diamond Dead, do it again? Yeah. So it's always a fun show.
And then if anyone likes you, wants to check out more of what you do, where can they find you?
AndrewLloydBachman.com is a good place to start, and you can find links to all sorts of different things.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time, sharing your story. Brian Cooper's real.
And this is just a trap to catch him.
Yeah, we're going to get him. Yeah, we're going to go just through a quick synopsis of the script. So I was taken back by the script because when I first read it, it was done in Final Draft, but he didn't actually put on a title page. It did the default of it. It's written by screenwriter, address down at the bottom, and it's title of movie.
From using Final Draft in film school, I can picture exactly what that looks like in my brain of somebody just completely ignoring to change anything on that default title page.
So by reading that at first, I was like, this can't be a real script. So there's 3 different versions. I read through the final version, the 3rd one, and that's the one that I'm going to do a synopsis of. We open on Aria de Winter, a weathered woman in her mid-40s, and she meets up with Death. He kind of speaks like Foghorn Leghorn.
Shit.
They meet up in this abandoned factory. Death is in need of 4 souls, describing them as 4 long-haired hippie types. Look like girls on the wrong end of the ugly stick. His quote, not mine. Their souls have not been risen out of the graves that they've been burying, so Aria suggests digging them up, but Death is exhausted and exclaims that he needs a break. So Aria does Death a favor and says that she can take over for him. Death agrees and makes a deal. She claims that he needs 1 soul per day for the year, starting on Halloween. Depending on when that starts, I guess that's all of Halloween. Anyway, so in exchange, she will gain youthful beauty, which I guess is something that she wanted. It wasn't really clear in the script, but she got youthful beauty by taking this job. And if she fails to get 365 souls, her soul will be claimed by Death. So Aria is given a scythe with a handle that reads forward and reverse. And just as Death leaves, Aria switches the mode to reverse, strikes the ground, and mummified arms and bursts out of the ground with a guitar in hand, and we cut to the title screen that says Diamond Dead. And I really love that open. Yeah, I was confused by the underlying motivations in the very beginning. So I read the first draft, and there seems to be no other explanation. But there was a vastly different scene. So in this one, instead, the 4 zombie band members hunt down 2 men like hyenas, while Aria plays a guitar solo from higher ground. The scene sounds really badass, and yet nothing is explained. And then in the second draft, they explained in the scene that there were actually 2 police officers who were investigating a crime scene, and then those 4 zombie people chase after them. It's all over the place. Anyway. We go to the Grand Quinault, which is like a music hall, almost like a theater. And then we meet Matthias Stark, owner of the Old Gothic Theater. He is behind on payments, and his last chance to save the theater is with the Dr. Diabolicus in the Diamond Dead concert. Aria arrives with the band, driving up in 4 customized hearses. Matthias is confused because he assumed the band was arriving tomorrow, which is on Halloween to set up, which he claims it is tomorrow. It's 3:12. Technically, she's right, it's true. Matthias just allows them to set up. When he offers to unlock the door, she tells him that there's no need, and she uses her magical powers to open the door. I don't know what magical power she was given by giving the scythe, but apparently she can unlock doors because of it. So. Aria and Matthias go to a coffee shop as the crew sets up. Meanwhile, we follow a punk couple, Jack and Gina, out getting food, and they discover the Diamond Dead is performing a concert. At the theater, they run into Death, who has them sign away their souls in exchange for backstage passes. Aria runs into Death, surprised to see him. Death explains that he has not seen a single soul since he gave her the scythe, and she has it until midnight to get all 365 souls. She says it's all under control, and she'll deliver what she promised. There is a VJ whose name is Pussy A Dangle.
All right.
I'm not going to keep on repeating that, so I will refer to A Dangle as a VJ from now on. But this VJ is working for Nerve TV and reports from the theater for the much anticipated Diamond Dead concert, claiming that they are, quote, the legendary rock band that everyone worships, but no one has ever seen. And that members of this band are in fact dead. A large crowd of metalheads and punks begin to gather. The VJ manages to get backstage to get an interview with the band. She is warned that they don't like bright lights, they don't like stupid questions, and they don't like fingers in their face, otherwise they will bite them off. We see Spider Sin. He wears an iron mask. One side of his hair is dyed white, while the other side is black. He wears sock puppets on each hand, and one of them is cute and the other one is evil looking. There's Glitter, a tall mummified cadaver dressed as a tattered French whore. There is Bartholomew Bands, described as Sid Vicious if he was beef jerky, wearing a torn tank top and leather pants. Lastly, there's Dr. Diabolicus, who doesn't get a character description because I guess he's just that awesome. In the interview, they claim that their success has to do with the fact that they are indeed dead. When they give permission to turn on the lights, the VJ then pukes at the sight of them and is then taken away by the paramedics. Matthias is having a nervous breakdown over the fact that the band is actually really dead. Arya sits him down and explains to him of what happened to them in a flashback. So back when the band was alive, they obtained a abnormally large subwoofer. Think like the amp from the first scene of Back to the Future. And on this, there's this warning label that says, danger. Do not operate ruptured subwoofer without connecting Renaissance filter. Extreme danger. I believe that he actually misspelled that in there because it's supposed to be...
Resonance?
Yeah, it's supposed to be resonance filter, but he spelled it Renaissance filter. So they test out the subwoofer, causing the building to collapse on the band, killing everyone except for Arya, who left before they could begin. So I think this is kind of where the first scene takes place, because it's supposed to be like this abandoned building where she meets death and like the zombies arise from there. So I think she's just returning to the scene of the crime of like when that happened. So back to the concert, Dr. D and the Diamond Dead open with a song called Necrophilia, followed by Crash Test Dummies in Love. As the concert continues, the US government is plotting a way to shut down the concert after the president is informed that his Bible-thumping Baptist preacher cousin has been warning him about the end of days and how the dead walk among us. The Reverend, he turns his congregation into an army to hunt down the undead. At the CIA headquarters, they resort to an agent named Veronica Vinyl to take care of the issue. She performs her number, On Your Knees, Bitch, before getting into a jet helicopter to the theater. It's such a weird scene because like the transformation of Veronica Vinyl, she's like dressed in like all leather, like BDSM leather, but it starts off with like just this regular CIA agent guy who goes into a back room, gets changed, comes out as Veronica Vinyl.
Do you know what all of this sounds like to me? The theater group Star Kid. One of the founding members was Darren Criss, and through doing this is how he got discovered and ended up on Glee and now has a big career. Basically, it's this little indie musical group. Their first big thing was a Harry Potter musical, which is a musical about Harry Potter. And like most of their stuff are just like genre comedy spoofs. It's really ridiculous. But their last two shows, they've been in the middle of a trilogy of horror-inspired stuff. The kind of songs, the kind of characters in their shows feel so similar to this. They did a show a couple years ago called The Guy Who Didn't Like Musicals. It's like an Invasion of the Body Snatchers type story, but the aliens, when they take over somebody, they start performing musical numbers. Their shows are fantastic, and I feel like if this sounds entertaining to you at all, definitely go check out Star Kid. They actually film all of their plays and put them up on YouTube for free.
Oh, cool.
So it's super easy to watch their shows.
I feel like there's something sinister infecting Hatchetfield. And I know this is going to sound crazy and not very scary, but it is scary if you think about the implications. Promise me you'll think about the implications.
Okay, I promise.
Okay, Emma, I think the world is becoming a musical.
And back to the story. Yeah. In the back, Matthias and Arya start getting it on. Because sure. They continue their conversation during their lovemaking session. It's mostly Matthias curiously asking about the band. The scene cuts back and forth between them and the band that's backstage, who are eating a unsavory meal of raw meats and exchanging stories of their experience in the afterlife, in which Dr. Diabolicus actually shares the story about how he smoked weed with Jesus.
Nice.
There is some factual evidence to that. Anyway, moving on.
What?
Hold on. You can't just leave that on the table, that Jesus used to smoke weed.
This is going to become an entirely different kind of podcast.
There's a podcast called Great Moments in Weed History.
Okay.
There was a whole episode on, there was a recipe of something from the Bible that they figured out one of the ingredients was cannabis or something like that. So yeah, that's all I remember really.
So Jesus and his disciples were making pot brownies.
Oh yeah, no, totally. They were high all the time.
You said this was your flesh. Oh no.
So Dr. Diabolicus smoked weed with Jesus.
With Jesus.
There we go.
In heaven. It's pretty great. So the Reverend and his mindless sheep make their way to the theater in 3 buses. Agent Vinyl gets there before the convoy and seduces the lead singer, Dr. D. The Reverend and his flock arrives with guns, also known as the AK-47 of Righteousness. Great. Arya finds out about Dr. D hooking up and is furious. Matthias is concerned because the band needs to get back on stage to finish the show. And then Arya gets Dr. D back onto stage after smacking him up just a little bit. During the intermission, the heads of the Diamond Dead security, Rasputin, is concerned about the armed flock and takes the contraband taken from the audience and then starts distributing them amongst the crowd in case things get ugly. So Spider, he finds Veronica Vinyl and wonders if he can get some sex too. She denies him at first. This movie is wild.
Yeah.
But after he says he'll give her information on how to reanimate the dead, now she's all into it. It wasn't clear before, but Spider talks through the good and evil sock puppet, so he kind of mimics what they say as he's talking to other people. It's weird, but it's great. Vinyl asks about the mask, in which Spider reveals his face, and she is absolutely horrified by what's underneath. Just before curtain, tension is high between the band members, and then Spider enters with blood covering his face. The second half of the concert begins with Arya playing guitar and summoning the rest of the band with her. Together, they play My Little Piece of Armageddon. The song turns into a musical number that involves the VJ, the Reverend, and Matthias singing to the tune. The Reverend and his flock break into the theater and takes a single shot at Glitter, more specifically through Glitter's Les Paul guitar. In a domino effect, the rest of the gun-toting nutbags begin just lighting up the place, and Rasputin holds up the flock with 10 armed roadies, and it's revealed that everyone in the theater is armed and has weapons pointed at the religious terrorists. The lights go out, and the firefight begins, and it lasts for a full 20 seconds. The lights come back on to reveal that many of the people have died. Death enters through a mist of fog. Arya has fulfilled her end of the deal. Death asks for the scythe, but Arya refused to give it back. She hits the reverse button on the scythe and spins it, causing the lights to flash and explode. Death goes towards Arya to get the scythe back and uses it to decapitate him instead. But because he's dead, he's still alive. The slain rise up from the dead and begin to sing. And the Reverend is still alive, and he sees the undead, and he runs out the exit as soon as possible. The punk couple, Jack and Gina, exit with Arya's guitar, which she threw into the crowd, and Dr. D's mic that I guess they left behind, along with some bullet wounds in them as well. Glitter is left with just his head, and after the show, distributes the rest of his belongings to the band. As the Reverend is trying to run away, he encounters the band leaving, and Spider takes off his mask, and a dark, tongue-like object impales the preacher. The band walks back onto the stage, and it's revealed that Veronica Vinyl is still alive and has the scythe in her hand, and is soon to be married to Spider. She says that she was sent by the president to get this object, but has changed her heart and believes that it shouldn't be wielded by any kind of power. And just then, the Grand Quinel explodes, sending the scythe through the air. The scythe embeds itself into the highway road where Arya and Mathis happen to be driving down. Arya asks if Mathis wants to come with and agrees not to. Matthias drives away. Arya walks down the road with the scythe over her shoulder. A custom hearse stops beside her and gives her a lift. Matthias, realizing what he just let go, makes a 180 and follows the hearse, agreeing to go with Arya in her next adventure. The song Good Friends begins and plays during the credits as they roll.
Well done.
I'll ask this to you guys before I answer this. Do you want to see this movie?
I am very curious. I want to make this movie.
I definitely would. I think this is all kinds of weird and inventive and strange, and I love crazy things like this.
I agree. It's reminding me of the movie we watched last night by Brian De Palma called
Phantom of the Paradise.
The story of a sound, the man who created it, the girl who sang it, the monster who stole it, and the phantom who haunts the paradise, the ultimate rock palace.
Which was like Rocky Horror Picture Show meets Phantom of the Opera. I don't even know how, like on crack or something. It was just, it was wild. It was just so bizarre, but it was fun.
It was something.
What came to mind to me a lot, and I know it's not really the same genre, but like Repo, the Genetic Opera, like it had that kind of intensity to it, but kind of like this edgelord type mentality behind it of like, they're basically just putting on a concert, but like done by the undead and just like making it stupid, ridiculous in every way possible.
Yeah, there was a lot more humor than I expected.
Mm-hmm. If you go through the website again with Brian Cooper, so like there's the bio about him, but he actually wrote down a kind of like this diary of how he came up with the movie. And the way that he writes, it's weird and out there. Like the way that he talks about writing the script, it was as if he was pregnant with the idea of this script and was like over time developing this baby inside of him and eventually like gave birth to it, which was the Diamond Dead. It's such a weird concept, but it wasn't his idea initially. It actually came from one of his friends that he hung out with. I'm trying to find Johnny Graves. And Johnny Graves, he is
not a real person.
Yeah. Johnny Graves III. He was part of the band Dark Shadows. I did look that up. He is actually real. But they were fans of horror movies. They were fans of rock music, punk, metal. And it was just one night that he came up with this screenplay idea because Brian Cooper, he has like written and published short stories before. And he usually gets a lot of people who comes up with him with ideas to be like, hey, you should write this down. Hey, you should write this down. And he's like, I am not really here to like write other people's ideas, but he got this idea from Johnny Graves about like this really weird like zombie band. And he actually came up with a few of the names like Bangs, Spiderson, and Glitter, and was like, I want you to kind of roll with that. And even in the beginning was like, maybe they can be like gay vampires doing this rock show. And he's like, okay, I think I can work with this. And then eventually developed it into Diamond Dead. According to wickedhorror.com, Romero was attached to the project for a few years, but the project eventually fizzled away when Romero signed a deal with Universal in 2004 to do Land of the Dead, which Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg, they got a cameo in that movie.
Oh.
They're like these zombies that are like chained to the wall. Yeah. While Romero was promoting Diary of the Dead in 2007, he was asked about Diamond Dead. And as far as he knew, there was a new draft that was submitted, but nothing came to fruition. And I think we mentioned that before with Mindy's research. For the casting, they got Asia Argento, who was in Land of the Dead. And she was also dating Anthony Bourdain just before he died by suicide. But she was considered to be the lead as Arya. Other potential actors that were going to be part of this were Johnny Depp, Christopher Lee, and David Bowie, but their roles were unknown.
Oh, David Bowie would have been great for this. Johnny Depp, that's too much of an obvious choice, but David Bowie.
Mm-hmm. Christopher Lee as Dr. Diabolical would be amazing. Because, one, he already had his own metal band. I don't know if anyone knows, but he has a Christmas album with his metal band as well.
Veiled in flesh and dressed so fine, hail to all in the tale of wine. Pleased to clap our hands and yell, Jesus understained himself. Darkest carols faithful sing, glory to the metal kings.
Yeah, Christopher Lee is an amazing human being.
Yes. Christopher Lee, literal Nazi hunter, metal singer, and great person. I could see him playing Death. I definitely imagine that kind of like grandiose. I don't know if Death had any songs, but...
The thing is with Death, and I think just because I read the script, he talked like Foghorn Leghorn.
Oh, right. Is it like Daniel Craig and Knives Out style?
Yeah.
Deep southern drawl.
A donut hole in a donut's hole.
Shut up with that Kentucky Fried Foghorn Leghorn drawl.
I say, I need 4 hippie types.
I actually legitimately love that idea of Death having that Texas oil baron style. It's like pulled straight out of Devil Went Down to Georgia, and that's the version of Death that we're getting.
There was also talk about Xbox developing a video game that would tie in with the movie. That was also abandoned as well. I don't know how the video game would work unless they do a rock band version and show the concert of like just like everyone turning into zombies when you're done with a song or something like that.
It could be like Brutal Legend. That's a video game based off of hard rock universe, which now makes me want Jack Black to be in Time and Dead.
Yes.
Guitar Hero mixed with Resident Evil somehow.
Yeah, there you go.
But lastly, unfortunately, with Romero's passing in 2017, we're probably never going to see this movie. And just before he passed away, he was working on a film called Twilight of the Dead, which, with the permission of his wife, Suzanne, she has given the green light to have that movie completed. They are just looking for the right director to complete that movie. Now, I kept thinking about, like, I do want to see this movie, but there is actually a movie that is a musical that involves zombies, which I think is amazing. And it's the movie Anna and the Apocalypse.
Yes, we were going to mention that. It's great.
Yeah.
I've never heard of this movie.
Oh, it's so good. And it's Scottish, too.
Yeah.
Oh.
It's a really, really funny movie.
It's basically a High School Musical with zombies.
Yep.
'Twas the night before Christmas, and all through the house, not a creature was stirring. Not even a mouse. Young Anna was nestled, all snug in her bed, not knowing tomorrow she'd meet the undead. How would she survive? What this season would bring? Well, that's simple. She'd stab, she'd slash, and she'd sing.
A time to be alive. What a time to be alive.
What? Justin Bieber's a zombie.
High School Christmas Zombie Musical Love Story. That's Scottish, yeah.
Perfect.
That is the Diamond Dead. Anything else we want to add before we wrap this up?
There was another unseen Romero movie that I don't even know if it was feature length that got recently released.
The Amusement Park.
One of these times, the door will open in your life and you will step into the amusement park.
It's on Shudder now. We covered it on our podcast on Horse Talk Horror. It was a documentary he made about elder abuse that takes place at an amusement park. It's only maybe like an hour long.
Yeah, it's short.
It's not great.
It is worth watching, though. Basically, this group came to him and said, we want to make a movie about elder abuse. And Romero was like, all right, I'm going to make my version of that. And it's fascinatingly interesting.
And you said it was recently like put out there? Like what happened?
Yeah, Shudder acquired the rights to it. It was never released.
Once they saw it, they said, this has never seen the light of day.
Huh.
It got released this year, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's from the 70s.
And I believe everyone in it, like most of the people at the amusement park were just like people who were at the amusement park that day. And he had like a couple old people going around and, you know, doing their thing, showing the evils of elder abuse. Just like these poor old people, they're just walking around and everyone's just taking advantage of them in any way possible, like taking their food, taking their money, pushing them around, beating the shit out of them. Like, it's so bizarre.
It looks like it was made in like a weekend.
So they made a movie about elderly abuse in which they had to commit elderly abuse in order to make this movie.
Yes, exactly.
Pretty much. Oh, it was the Lutheran Society that hired him to make it.
That's the other weird thing. It was funded by the Lutheran Society. They're like, who do we get to make this film about elder abuse? I know, the guy that did Night of the Living Dead.
Right?
Let's get him involved.
I'm sure that they sold it as like, oh, don't worry, this guy used to work for Mr. Rogers.
Yeah.
He is
Right?
a wonderful director. He's done great stuff. You're going to love him.
He's really good at educational stuff. That's literally probably all they knew him from. You're right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's worth checking out because it's short. I didn't care for
All
it,
right.
but it's out there.
I'll have to check that out.
All right. Any other thoughts about this project?
I honestly think because Romero wasn't like officially tied to it, he didn't create it. He doesn't own any sort of rights to it. So it's possible that this could get made someday, I think.
Yeah.
I got dibs.
So Brian Cooper, if you are listening, and I know you are, you can email us at notgetmade@gmail.com.
If there's a filmed version of the stage production they put on, I absolutely want to see that. Or at the very least, I want to see other theaters do this production. I like the idea of it also just being a weird indie theater thing. I just realized something about myself latching on to the idea of this as a stage production as opposed to a movie. And I think that desire to see it comes from when I was in high school. My senior year, we did a play called William Shakespeare's Land of the Dead, which was a play about Shakespeare and his acting troupe. So it's like, Shakespeare was a character played by Michael Hunter from our other podcasts. And the Black Plague rolls through town, except instead of the Black Plague, it's a zombie plague. And so it's Shakespeare dealing with zombies. It was actually a really, really fun and silly and ridiculous show.
It's a plague play.
Exactly.
That sounds awesome. But I think the closest thing was watch the Brian De Palma film, which the name is escaping me again.
Phantom of the Paradise.
There you go. Watch that. That is probably the closest you'll get to Diamond Dead.
I guess it's going to go ahead and wrap us up. So thank you for listening, everybody. And thank you two for being on the program with us. If people want to find more of what you've got going on, where can they find that?
You can find Horrors Talk Horror on basically any podcast streaming platform. There is, Spotify, Apple, Stitcher. We're also
You have these ready to go. Audible.
We're also on YouTube. There's no video, but our audio is on YouTube along with our lovely logo that Spencer created.
That way Dan's mom can check out the podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. If YouTube is more your thing, you can catch us there. We are on Instagram at Horrors Talk Horror and Twitter at Horrors Horror.
And I guess you can find me. I have the podcast called The Dictionary, which you guys have been so graciously putting my ad, and I've been putting your ad at the end of mine too. Instagram and Twitter, just at Dictionary Pod, also on all of the streaming things. And I've been putting mine on YouTube as well, but in chunks of 10 episodes. So
that's a smarter idea.
Right, 11 through 20 is one video. Anyway.
Because you've got 1,000 episodes.
Yeah, over 1,000. We have a new thing. I have been working with my friend producing his feature-length animated film, which is also a musical called Unplugged.
Oh.
And Sharon just yesterday basically got officially added on as an associate producer. I got upgraded to regular producer. We are both extremely proud of this and really happy to be a part of this film.
And it has a great cast. Christina Ricci's in it. She's already recorded her lines. The late, great Ed Asner.
Oh, wow.
It will probably be his final project by the time this animated film gets released. Cheryl Lee, Dana Ashbrook from Twin Peaks, Jerry Ryan from Star Trek Voyager, Lou Gossett Jr. from Roots. I mean, it is.
Wow.
So go follow us on at Unplugged the Film on Instagram, please. And spread the word. Because we're trying to get funding now.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's a really heartfelt story that was written and everything done by Paul McComas.
Yeah, help make it be something that does not end up as an episode of this podcast, because it actually
Yes.
Yeah.
We don't want to come back in a few years talking about it.
I'm still pushing for the Mario Brothers movie, the whatever that is, with Chris Pratt.
To be an episode of this podcast?
Yes, it needs to be an episode of this podcast. This cannot happen. This movie cannot.
This will be the first time that you actually are coming to a movie to like actively stop it from being made just so it can be on the podcast.
Yeah, this is for my benefit and my benefit alone.
Right.
Nice.
Although I am also very curious to see this movie.
Yeah, cast by Kevin T. Porter.
Well, thank you, Spencer and Sharon, for being on this podcast with us. If people want to find more episodes of this podcast, you can find our website, pipedreampodcasts.com, which also has shows such as Come On Fahugwa Pods, Escape from Vault Disney, and the Mystery Shack Look Back. While you're there, you can find links to our social media pages and our email address, notgetmade@gmail.com. We love getting any suggestions or corrections. And finally, I don't think we've mentioned this in a little while, we always appreciate it when you rate us on iTunes. That is one of the best ways still to make sure podcasts get noticed. All right. that's going to go ahead and wrap us up. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Crash test, dummies in love. You think when we learn that love kills, we learn that love kills. Crash test, dummies in love. It always ends badly, but the ride's the thrill.